welcome to another episode of Colleen's Stash Busting Summer. I've decided I'm doing stash busting builds all summer long, maybe even longer than that, so that just means that I am focusing on making cosplays that I can make entirely or almost entirely just with materials and fabrics I already own. The amount of fabric I've stored in this house is low-key stressing me out. And also, it just helps me save money too if I just use the fabrics I already have at home. Right? Right, guys? We have Joann's at home. Joann's at home. I would like to make a Supergirl fashion pack. So basically, a bunch of Supergirl pieces that can mix and match and accessories. Just, you know, a fashion pack like you would get for your dolls. First, I want to make a bodysuit. Long-sleeved, I guess a leotard is the better word for it because it doesn't have the legs. Next, I would like to make a skirt in the same blue fabric. And when that skirt is paired with that leotard, I will get an outfit that looks like Supergirl's solar suit is what I've been calling it, or her blue dress. Next, I would like to make a red skirt. When that skirt is paired with that blue leotard, I get something that looks like her rebirth design. But I also own Supergirl's crop top and skirt outfit that I made a few years ago, and if I put that red skirt with that blue crop top, I have something that looks like the new Supergirl outfit from the comics this summer. But that's not all. We also have accessories, right? So I'd like to make, with this vinyl, a Supergirl cape. I just think this vinyl would be like a really cool texture for a cape, and I'd like to make it in the same way that I can switch it out with the other cape I already own. I would also like to make a pair of Supergirl wheel covers using vinyl. I don't know why I don't have Supergirl specific wheel covers yet. I've cosplayed her since before I even used a wheelchair. But I also might end up buying some extra Supergirl shoes or wigs. So of those like 4 outfits, there's kind of like an infinite variation when you throw in different wigs, different shoes. And as a side note, I do still own my New 52 Supergirl and my Killers of Krypton Supergirl, so throwing those pieces into the mix as well, I feel like I just have basically an unlimited amount of Supergirl combinations if I add these pieces in. The first item I'd like to start on with this fashion pack is the blue leotard. I will be using, of course, the Yaya Hans Ultimate Bodysuit pattern. I actually have multiple copies of this pattern, and the one I will be using today, I have altered so that it is able to fit my abnormally long torso. I was not aware I had an abnormally long torso for a human, but once I started working with bodysuit patterns, it was pretty clear that I'm a long torso girly. So you can see how I've added about 6 inches of length in the middle of each of these bodysuit pieces. I'm going to line the leotard in this bright blue fabric. I'm a little nervous using such a bright color for a lining, but I have so much of this blue. I've used this pattern and these fabrics so many times before that it was just really satisfying how fast this came together. It just really goes to show that with more experience, this stuff does eventually get easier. This is a lining layer. I did go one size bigger on the McCall's pattern, and I am loving it. There's a lot more space in the arms, and it just fits more comfortably. The only other thing I wanted to mention that's a bit different is I am leaving the crotch seam open so that it's easier to go to the bathroom at cons. The last Supergirl bodysuit, that was the Rebirth one, I've sold that one, it's gone. But that one, I did not have the opening at the bottom, and if I ever wanted to go to the bathroom, I'd have to take off legitimately the whole costume. I think we can move on to the outside layer. One of the first things I'll need to do is the Supergirl logo. It is much easier to applique this logo on a flat piece of fabric than a finished leotard. I figured I would just make it easy and pick a logo that I already had. Started cutting it out and realized it was lopsided. That means I just needed to go and do the whole printing, sizing process. The gold is the Cosplay Fabrics metallic stretch, and for the red, I was a bit conflicted. I had the matte stretch, or I had the pattern octagon fabric. The deal breaker for me is I do still want to have these be mix and match. So I ended up using the 4-way matte stretch fabric for the logo. It's a much better match to the vinyl that I want to make the cape out of. And then we can do the Supergirl applique, which I have not done in a while. So the process, as I remember it, is sewing down the red logo to the gold background onto a piece of tearaway stabilizer. And then once that has been cut out, then I can sew that onto the leotard with another layer of tearaway stabilizer. Then I can finally go in and do the satin stitching. It is a whole lot of steps, but satin stitching stretch fabrics is just really difficult because they are always stretching in different directions. So it's really important to take these extra steps and have plenty of stabilizer available before committing to the satin stitch. Then it's time to finish up the outside layer of the leotard. The only pattern piece that's a bit different for the outside layer is I wanted to do something a bit more interesting with the sleeve. I decided to just go for a simple pointed end to the sleeve because I already had it patterned for some previous project. Then I am sewing all of these pieces together, which goes pretty similarly to how I sewed the lining layer together, except some of these pieces are sewn in a different order to accommodate those 4 front pieces already being sewn together for the applique. I'm also doing a top stitch wherever possible. I just think it looks really nice. And I'm not worried about pattern matching. That's not something I'm trying to achieve with this costume, but it did end up pattern matching in a few places, which was really nice. I have some really tasty looking seams on this bodysuit, which I'm proud of. So just a heads up, if you end up using this fabric, a lining might not even be necessary. It's not sheer at all. It has like a really good weight to it. But since I already made the lining, I feel I might as well use it. I love this fabric. I love how the applique turned out. Oh, she's so cute. So starting from top to bottom, the laundry list of items I need to do to finish this leotard appropriately. The neckline. I would like it to look pretty much exactly like the neckline on my crop top and skirt Supergirl, just so that it can work with the cape in the same way. So that cape attaches with a harness. The harness is worn under the outfit. So I want to have that wide scoop neck. I will be finishing off the neckline with some bias tape folded over. I need to add a little bit something just so that the bright blue of the lining layer isn't peeking out from the top. Next, the sleeves. These are a bit long, I believe. And I will be adding a facing to the inside of the lining layer sleeve. I felt like it made more sense to just have the bottom of the lining layer be this same octagon pattern so that if the sleeve kind of like flips up, you still see that same octagon pattern instead of the bright blue lining layer. Obviously, I will need to put a zipper in the back eventually, so I use these really big zippers that I can use with my adaptive tool. They're really easy for my hand to grasp. Then finally, the leg holes. I definitely need to adjust some of the sizing a little bit. I feel like the leg holes need to go higher so they actually match where the bend in my hip is. And I think I will finish off the leg holes the same way I did the neckline with that bias tape. And then finally adding the snaps along the crotch seam so that I can use the bathroom. Ta-da! Bodysuit is finally done. I think this may be the nicest bodysuit I've ever made. It fits really nicely. That is the hardest part about making bodysuits, is getting the tailored fit. Wait. So I do have like a stand-in skirt to show you how it looks with the skirt on. This is cute. So logically, it would make the most sense for me to make the skirts next. But I'm actually gonna make wheel covers next. And that is because I have a brand collab coming up. And I just had this idea of like one of the outfits with like the cape and the Supergirl wheels. And I just think it'd be super cool. I need to make the wheel covers to do that though. And the brand collab is coming up very quickly. So I'm gonna try and knock these out really fast. Fabric wheel covers are easily the best documented process on my YouTube channel. So I'll be going through it pretty quickly in this video. The only big difference with these wheel covers and the ones in all those tutorials is I am using a really thick vinyl for the base of this wheel cover. For the red of the symbol, I'll be using the red PVC vinyl. For the gold, I would like to still use the gold metallic stretch, but I really need it to be a non-stretch for this applique, so I'm using a fusible stabilizer to make it non-stretch. And making this applique is going to follow a lot of the same steps as the bodysuit applique, except it's non-stretch, and it's bigger, and it's being appliqued onto a flat surface, and all those things make this way easier. This vinyl is so thick, it is really hard to turn over the edges and hem it, so instead, I am taking a lining layer on the back. This is just a cheap polyester that I haven't been able to use up from my stash. And I'm finishing the edges with a bias tape folded over the edge. This wheel cover is now at the most tedious part of the process, and that is hand sewing snaps onto all my little connector strips so it can wrap around the wheelchair and connect. And I was thinking while I was hand sewing these snaps onto this wheel cover, I could have a little story time with you guys about cosplaying Supergirl. It is actually so fitting that I am rushing to get these covers done for a brand collab, because what I want to talk about is how Supergirl is the business suit of my cosplay career. Now, I use the term career very lightly. I am not a professional cosplayer. I am not a professional YouTuber. I'm sorry guys, I work a boring corporate desk job and that's how I'm able to afford everything you see. When I do get the occasional cosplay gig, whether that's volunteer work or paid, I find myself pulling out my Supergirl cosplays pretty often. Everyone knows who Supergirl is. She's incredibly recognizable, even to people who aren't a part of fandom. I've also worn Supergirl for a whole lot of different podcasts. There was a time when I was doing a podcast, like interview or guesting spot every month for like 6 months straight. I used to be on podcasts all the time, and Supergirl was also a cosplay I would just bring out for those sorts of things. It's kind of awkward when I'm like a guest on this podcast and we're eating up the limited time we have so I can explain what Winx Club is, and I'm just like, oh yeah, it's this Italian cartoons show. No, it has English dubs. It actually has like 6 different English dubs. I'm a fairy, but the reason I don't have wings is this isn't my fairy form. And by the time I'm done explaining Winx Club, like we've lost like 10 minutes of the podcast, you know? So at least with Supergirl, I've never had to explain who I am cosplaying. The costume is usually pretty comfortable for me. It's also really fortunate that I just happen to have blonde hair naturally. It's not as blonde anymore. I ended up having to add highlights as I got older. But I've also worn Supergirl with natural hair before, and that's really nice. I don't need to do any super crazy makeup for her. I wore her to Fan Expo Portland when I was guesting there. I actually wore 2 Supergirls to that con, and I think I'm gonna get into Supergirl for a con guesting announcement. Like, she's just amazing for all of my business stuff. I'm gonna be wearing this costume a lot, and that was actually a lot of the driving motivation to do this Supergirl fashion pack idea. I pull Supergirl out so often that I was thinking if I had like these mix and match outfits, I could still switch it up a little bit. And you know, then I still have like a different outfit to take pictures of, and I don't get bored with it. Because I'm sorry, sometimes I get bored bringing out Supergirl, but it also just doesn't really feel worth it to try and explain what Monster High is in a webinar or something. Like, I'd rather wear Supergirl. So the wheel covers are done! Da-da-da! The shirt says, "No one is you and that's your superpower," and I felt like this was the vision, okay? I felt like it worked. So with the wheel covers done, and I made those in like a week. I was like rushing to get them done for this. Now we can make some skirts! To keep things simple, I am using the same pattern for both skirts. The base is this Simplicity 1200 skirt pattern, and then I am pulling out the Supergirl skirt I already have to use as a template for the length. I would also like to add that iconic V-shaped gold waistband that we see in so many of Supergirl's costumes. So I'm taking the waistband pattern and I'm cutting it out at an angle on the fold of the fabric. Then when I unfold the fabric, we have that V shape. Sewing is pretty simple for these, just sewing up the side seams. I had to cut in a little bit of a V shape into the center front for our waistband, but otherwise it is sewn in like any other waistband. I tried on the lining layer. Everything looked good, so I repeated the process. Now the blue skirt is 2 layers. It's completely lined. And the red skirt is just 1 layer for the skirt, though I did still keep the waistband lined so I could have that nice finished edge at the top. I did some top stitching and some hemming, and we have 2 skirts. It's really that easy. We got 2 Supergirl skirts, and there are things I really like about both of them, so let me show you what they look like. So here is the blue skirt. It is a bit thicker and it has 2 layers of fabric instead of 1. I love the standing drape on this. I was actually quite sad after I finished it because there's so few cosplay things I do where I don't use the wheelchair anymore, and I just love how this looks standing. It is like the Sailor Moon pleats, the Sailor Moon silhouette with the V in the front. This is the red one for comparison. I feel like this is much more like classic Supergirl, much softer drape. I just think it's really cool how I used the same pattern for both skirts, but because the fabric properties were so different, they ended up having like really different silhouettes to them. That's done. The last piece we need to sew for our fashion pack is a new cape. So I wanted this cape to be very similar in pattern to the one I already have, but with a collar. Without going into too much detail, the cape size and shape that I have is very much because I use a wheelchair. So I don't want to change the length or the width. I just would like to add a collar because I think that would look cool. So I'm pulling out the dress form and I'm just doing a quick mock-up to bring up the collar of this cape. Now I thought perhaps I could get away with just having this be one big pattern piece, but the thing is when you don't have seams in your fabric, it's hard for it to lay on the curved shape of a human body, right? So it just looked a little bit weird. It was kind of sticking out in weird ways without the seam. So I ended up cutting the cape into 3 patterned pieces, kind of the center one and then 2 panels on the side. Then of course, sewing those together, top stitching them. At this point, I realized I should do a try on with my actual leotard and the harness. And I realized that this cape with this vinyl fabric is quite bulky going under the leotard, so I did end up cutting away at some of that front fabric so that it could more easily slide under the leotard. So here's a look at what the finished pattern looked like. I did my 4th and final applique for this project, again using the interfacing on the gold metallic stretch to make it non-stretch. sewed the outside and lining layers together with the collar sandwiched between, flipped this huge thing inside out, top stitched all the edges, and then added snaps. And I will still be using my old cape harness. I can't wear more than one cape at a time anyways, so I don't see any reason to make a second cape harness. So I'm gonna put this onto the cape harness. So that's how it looks when it's not underneath the leotard. I love the collar on it. It was a bit inspired by the finale look in Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow. I really love that look. That was actually one of the cosplays I was going to do before I switched to the fashion pack idea. The last thing to show you guys is all the stuff I purchased. And while it was super cool to save money by only using fabric I already owned, I didn't have to buy any new fabric for this project. I spent probably as much money as I saved on wigs and shoes. So starting with the wigs, I have the I'm Styles lace front wig, which you saw in the brand collab that I did. This wig is, I believe, the same as the one I used for my Supergirl Rebirth costume a while back. When I sold my Rebirth costume, I sold the wig with it. So when I was looking for new wigs for Supergirl, I was like, man, I just wish I had that wig back. And I kind of realized that I could probably just buy it again. And I did. So there you go. A Supergirl wig so good that I bought it twice. On more the cheaper side of things, I found a used Arda wig. And this was only like $12 or something. I think I'll probably restyle it a little bit. Kind of a shorter wig that I could curl. Moving on to shoes. So I wanted at least one pair of shoes that I could walk in. As I mentioned, I really can't think of many scenarios where I would be doing a cosplay thing and I wouldn't be using the wheelchair, but I also figured that if I'm gonna have 5 different pairs of Supergirl shoes, I should have at least one that I can walk in. So I ended up getting these red combat boots, which also inspired by my old Supergirl Rebirth costume. I was once again thinking like, man, I just wish I had those combat boots that I sold with that costume. And I was like, I'll buy those again too. I did not intend for this video to be a remake of that Rebirth costume, but depending on how you pair up the fashion pack, it really could be. It could be. Last pair of shoes is I wanted a pair of thigh highs. Supergirl has a few different outfits where she has thigh-high boots, and I do not have any that are that tall currently. So I got these, which are really fun. And both of the shoes I got used off of Depop or Mercari. I don't really remember, but it was used off of resale sites. As you can imagine, I have a huge amount of combinations for Supergirl cosplays now. It would probably be impossible for me to show you all of them in the reveal of this video, so I'm just going to pick one combination and show you guys. On to the final reveal of one possible combination with my Supergirl fashion pack. So final thoughts on this project. I mean, I think I'm gonna wear all these pieces a lot. And I used only fabric from my stash, which feels really good. I also think it's gonna be really easy to add on in the future. So like, I'm kind of thinking I could buy a trench coat and make a skirt out of this pleather. And I'd be like pretty reasonably close to the new outfit Supergirl wears in the new Superman movie, right? My only other wish list items would be like a bodysuit with legs for that Woman of Tomorrow look, or for Dawn of DC Supergirl, and probably the Dawn of DC Supergirl jacket too. So like, I definitely feel like it's very easy to add on do other looks. Like this could just be the beginning. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye!